Whereas it is provided by Section 63(1)(a) of the Public Finance Management Act number 14 of 2020, the Act, that the Minister for Finance may, by an affirmative resolution of Parliament, borrow from a bank or a financial institution for the capital or current expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided by Section 64 of the Act that money borrowed by the government must be paid into and form part of the consolidated fund. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow an amount of US 18 million from the International Development Association for the implementation of the unleashing of the blue economy of the Caribbean project. And whereas the service charge is the greater of the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge and 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. And whereas the maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% on the unwithdrawn financing balance, and whereas the loan is repayable in 40 years commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan inclusive of a grace period, and whereas the principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of May and 15th day of November each year, commensurate with the following terms. 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of May 2042 and including the 15th day of November 2041. 2% of the loan amounting commencing on the 15th day of May 2042 and including the 15th day of November 2061. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow an amount of US $18 million from the International Development Association for the implementation of the unleashing of the blue economy of the Caribbean project. And be it further resolved that the service charge is the greater of the sum of 3/4 of 1% per annum plus the basis adjustment to the service charge and 3/4 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. The maximum commitment charge is 1/2 of 1% per annum on the withdrawn financing balance. The loan is repayable in 40 years, commencing from the date of disbursement of the loan, inclusive of a grace period of 10 years. The principal amount of the loan is repayable on each 15th day of May and 15th day of November each year, commencing with the following terms. 1% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of May 2042 and including the 15th day of November 2041. 2% of the loan amount commencing on the 15th day of May 2042 and including the 15th day of November 2061. Mr. Speaker, this project was mentioned on page 38, Mr. Speaker, of my budget address. Page 48. Where we spoke of introducing the blue economy. And in my conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I made the point that, and I want to quote Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we said, Mr. Speaker, that every policy that we have included in the budget, Mr. Speaker, is grounded by where we're going to get the money from and is grounded in the tradition of unity, in the tradition of working together with CARICOM, Mr. Speaker. I said so in the conclusion to my budget, Mr. Speaker. And so this project, Unleashing the Blue Economy, is another one of these projects, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the project was approved by the World Bank in May 2022. It was a project cost of $56 million for 3 islands, Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent, Mr. Speaker, with St. Lucia's component being $18 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the project was to do the following things. It was to help countries pivot towards a more sustainable tourism model that offers an opportunity to establish a higher value and more resilient industry. 2, expansion of women-owned and managed businesses in the blue economy. And 3, Mr. Speaker, it comprised of grant funding of US $1 million each to Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that project, as I said, was approved by the World Bank in May 2022, Mr. Speaker, after negotiations and discussions and very tedious work by the staff of the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Speaker. It was approved in May 2022. Mr. Speaker, the project aims, Mr. Speaker, to improve St. Lucia's tourism offerings by making use of basically the sea. The blue economy, Mr. Speaker. That is the buzzword now for the sea. It's called the blue economy. And in my budget address, I also spoke about investments in the blue economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it will implement programs that will manage and enforce the protection of St. Lucia's blue seas and grow the island's blue economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, St. Lucia relies on tourism, and we have to improve the nature of our tourism products, but we still have to build climate resilience and protect the integrity of the shared coastal and marine natural assets. In other words, Mr. Speaker, it must be sustainable. So you have to ensure that your waste management is controlled. You have to ensure that you protect and you respect your oceans, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the project is in 4 components. And the 4 components are as follows. Component number 1, US $2.6 million. It's for strengthening governance policies and capacity building. Component number 2 is $14.5 million is to scale up access to finance and infrastructure investments. And component number 3, contingent emergency response. Component number 4, project management, monitoring and evaluation and communication. Mr. Speaker, the Governor of St. Lucia will establish a project implementation unit, a PIU, to run the project, Mr. Speaker. And because of the nature of the project, because of the link to the environment, because of the link to the SDGs, the financing is deemed as long-term concessional financing for the purpose of the general conditions of the project. And this is why we have such generous terms, Mr. Speaker, because of the nature of the project, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, this project is aimed at protecting our blue economy. The blue economy is the sea, the oceans, and also ensuring that we reduce poverty, increase employment, especially particularly for women who are employed in the blue economy activity. Because you know, Mr. Speaker, women suffer disproportionately when there is a crisis. Like during the COVID pandemic, more women lost their jobs than men because of the nature of the work they do, Mr. Speaker. So the grant portion of that funding will help women. It will promote economic growth, job creation, and diversify the solution economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's also an issue with waste management. The lack of proper solid and plastic waste management is a major contributor to marine pollution and represents a direct threat to all economic sectors of the island that depend on healthy marine ecosystems. So this project, Mr. Speaker, will help also in waste management, Mr. Speaker. In waste management to prevent the waste from entering the oceans and creating plastic, etc., Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to make a plea to the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, if you look in any river, or in most rivers in the country, you will see that rivers that we knew that were flowing, Mr. Speaker, because most of us here are born in St. Lucia, and we know where the rivers, and we know how the rivers flowed. You know about the Bassin and things so. You'll see, Mr. Speaker, that most of these rivers, they're drying up, Mr. Speaker. So the younger generation can't go into the rivers, etc. Mr. Speaker, you also understand, and even when the rivers are drying up, there is so much debris, fridges, chairs, stoves, desks, beds, plastic, mattress. Mr. Speaker, and the sad thing is that people can ask you for a contract to clean the river. Mr. Speaker, I want to urge the people of St. Lucia that you're laughing, that's true, right? Mr. Speaker, I want to urge the people of St. Lucia, do not throw garbage in the rivers because you know that the government must give you a contract to clean it. Mr. Speaker, damage to the rivers, damage to the oceans with unnecessary waste, Mr. Speaker, is creating problems not only for us, but for the future generation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member from Library spoke about climate change, Mr. Speaker. And this morning, albeit mentioned in a very flippant manner, we spoke about climate resilience clauses, Mr. Speaker. And this is important because the climate change is going to be the biggest phenomena facing the world in the not too distant future. And the Minister for the Environment, Mr. Speaker, he has been tasked with the idea of managing this issue of climate change, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a serious problem. And I want the people of St. Lucia to put it in the language that they use, climate change. We've just begun to see floods. We've just begun to see droughts. We've just begun to see sea swells, Mr. Speaker, because of climate change, because of the level of carbon in the atmosphere, Mr. Speaker. We are trying our best for our NCDs. We are trying our best, Mr. Speaker, but everybody must understand the importance of the phenomenon of climate change. So each of us must play our part, Mr. Speaker. We are not the ones who have created the problem, but we are the ones who can suffer. Mr. Speaker, it is very possible for us to get up one morning and find, because of a hurricane, as it happened before, Hurricane Thomas, the Christmas Eve storm, as happened before, that our country can be devastated. Happened in Dominica, it happened in Grenada, it happened in Barbuda, Mr. Speaker. Or even Jamaica, Hurricane Gilbert at that time, much as now. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to take this climate change situation very, very seriously. And the world is not helping less developed countries or underdeveloped countries as far as climate change is concerned, climate change financing, because they say that we are middle income countries. How do they calculate middle income? By the use of the gross national product, which doesn't make sense, Mr. Speaker. Gross national income. That is how they measure our level of development, and they say we are middle income countries. Not understanding the vulnerabilities that exist in our region, Mr. Speaker. And the Caribbean Development Bank is working on what they call an RDA. An RDA, which means that you measure our vulnerabilities in other terms, in terms of our ability to revive after disaster. This is what the Caribbean Development Bank is working on. It's called an RDA, Mr. Speaker. Because if you have to use the traditional national income statistics, as the member for Labby said, it's an average figure, and you can find a few people very high up, and the majority are low down, but the national income will look well. So that is what the CDB is working on, and the United Nations also is working on vulnerabilities, Mr. Speaker, because we are vulnerable countries. These small islands in the region are vulnerable, and the greatest vulnerability is what happens, the damage after a hurricane, after a climate event. It's called loss and damage, and The world is not ready. They pledged at every COP, there are pledges to assist us in assisting us in these vulnerabilities. The last pledge was for $100 billion. The world has not yet paid a fraction of this $100 billion, Mr. Speaker. So this loan is our contribution to preserving our fisheries sector, to preserving our tourism sector, and to helping our small business people, particularly women, produce and gain an income in using the blue economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think it's a project that is commendable, and I would urge people, members of the Honourable House, to support it, Mr. Speaker, and look at the processes by which we can get benefits from this project, which is also in St. Vincent and Grenada. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are a few things, Mr. Speaker, that it is very important that we put it on the record. Very important, Mr. Speaker, because our children and our children's children, when they read Hansard, they must realize and understand who said what, when, and how, Mr. Speaker. Because when you speak in this Honourable House, it's on the record. Every word we say is on the record, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, said that we are naive. We are naive, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, it's the first time, Mr. Speaker, where at the Summit of the Americas, that CARICOM plus Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, got the audience of the President of the United States 3 times. Historical. Because you know why? Because CARICOM was speaking with one voice, Mr. Speaker, and CARICOM was united, and CARICOM was saying to the United States, listen to us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Summit of the Americas, and as we speak, 3 committees were formed with the White House and the U.S. Department of Treasury to deal with 3 important issues: finance, food security, and energy. Historic, Mr. Speaker. But because I don't come to this country and boast and say things and imagine things and exaggerate on things, people seem to underestimate what CARICOM is doing, Mr. Speaker. And that is why I believe firmly in CARICOM, Mr. Speaker, in the unity of the Caribbean countries. And even if there sometimes CARICOM probably may seem to be divided, Mr. Speaker, but the strength of numbers, and this is why CARICOM is being considered, and CARICOM's voice, Mr. Speaker, is so loud and powerful. Mr. Speaker, the member for Microsoft has a very short memory, Mr. Speaker. He comes here and he speaks about mitigation. That was the same honorable member. When he came into government, he found a total consultancy to assist in mitigation of floods in Bexon. It was a consultancy that was funded by the Caribbean Development Bank, by a Canadian firm did the consultancy, Mr. Speaker. There were community meetings held in Bexon to alleviate the problems of flood mitigation in Bexon. No one said that the floods would disappear, but mitigation, the same mitigation he comes and he speaks glibly about now. When he came into government, he found the consultancy done. He found the loan approved, Mr. Speaker. But because of the governance of these projects, just like the Grocery Highway, the governance issues, which he asked, what's that money going to be spent for? I said before, I'll tell him again. The governance issue, Mr. Speaker, he scrapped the project. He scrapped it. And you know what they said? They said that you could dredge, only what you have to do is to desilt the rivers in Cul-de-sac and Bexon, and you will have no problems. You know why? Because you can't check how much silt that comes out of the river. So he scrapped the entire project. You understand? And people must remember this, because people hear these things, Mr. Speaker, and that is why, and they believe it, because it's said with an accent. People believe in this, because there's the same member from Microsoft who scrapped this project, you know. Mr. Speaker, I mean, some of the things that I hear, this road to Damascus situation, as if I was so great and I was so good, and the people of St. Lucia was so cruel to me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have to clear these things, Mr. Speaker. Never before have the Small Island Development State, SIDS, been so united in that fight, Mr. Speaker. Never before. Mr. Speaker, the member for Microsoft, right now funding, we're speaking about green bonds, blue bonds, using the assets of the blue economy, green bonds, because of what happened in climate change, Mr. Speaker. That's the level of financing because of advocacy. Not there yet. The Caribbean Development Bank, the RDA, he says about, he tries to per capita and national income. Mr. Speaker, again, just throwing jargon to make other people look bad, or to pretend to make other people look bad, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, national income statistics is what derives per capita. You get per capita from national income statistics. That's how you get per capita. So what's the difference between capital and national income? But you know, but that is what? Saying these things because of his mixed degree. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you I said it before, let me tell you again, Mr. Speaker. The $18 million, component number 1, 2.6 million, strengthening governance policies and capacity building. And that's a problem, Mr. Speaker. Governance, following the rules, so ministers cannot go and dictate to technocrats what to do because they are ministers, Mr. Speaker. And many of the problems in this country that we inherit is because of ministers without the technical knowledge. One minister, two of them in particular, giving people instructions, Mr. Speaker, saying what to do and where to do, and who to employ and who not to employ. Governance, capacity building, that is what's needed, Mr. Speaker. And that is why we are the mess we are at Iwanora International Airport. That's for another discussion. Because of poor governance. Because somebody has a dream and they believe because their dream is right, because they say they have a vision, without thinking about it, without putting it to the test, they just decide, I'm right. So you go and you, instead of putting 76 piles, you drive 3,000 and you start with a cost overrun of over $40 million already. That's what's happening here now. That's what's happening there. Because of a dream, an elusive dream, that you can have the top floor to put VIP lounges, so you elevate the airport, you put VIP lounges on the top floor, because you dream that it's going to work. No statistical information, no evidence base, Mr. Speaker. The study done by SLASPA on the airport, it said nothing about any third story. Said nothing about it. But, Mr. Speaker, and that's the mess we are in today, because of lack of capacity building and governance, Mr. Speaker. So $2.6 million for that. $14.5 million for scale-up access to finance and infrastructure investment, Mr. Speaker. That is what the bulk of the money is going to be used for infrastructure development, Mr. Speaker. Direct investments in resilient coastal infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. And scale up access to finance to MSMEs, Mr. Speaker, and fisher folk. and the $1 million is in grants, and the other $700,000, Mr. Speaker, is for insurance, expansion of the regional climate risk insurance for the fishery sector. Because the fishery sector, Minister will tell you, is at risk, because many people don't understand that the fishers suffer just as much as the farmers when there are hurricanes. So $700,000 for regional climate risk insurance for the fishery sector. So, Mr. Speaker, that is what the money is going to be used for, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we, as I said, in my budget address, Mr. Speaker, on page 67, here's what I said, Mr. Speaker. I said, to those who ask where the money is coming from, I say, every proposal has been cost and accounted for. To those who say, how are we going to get all this done? I say, look very closely, Mr. Speaker, and you will see that everything that we have proposed has been framed within existing global, local, and regional arrangements which will provide technical, institutional, and financial support for our programs. So that is what. So today, Mr. Speaker, we had 3 motions. 2 of them, Mr. Speaker, framed in a regional framework. The blue economy and the data project, Mr. Speaker. All of them framed within a regional construct, Mr. Speaker. And that is how we do our business in this government, Mr. Speaker. We think about it, we discuss it, and we follow technical advice, Mr. Speaker, trying to have the best levels of accountability and governance. So, Mr. Speaker, this project is a 6-year project, starting in 2022. It's a 6-year project, Mr. Speaker, and again framed within a regional context. Mr. Speaker, I'm confident that the people of St. Lucia will benefit from this project, and I thank members for supporting. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.